They stalked the night, shrouded in darkness, blood on their lips and eternity in their eyes. Vampires. But long before Hollywood made them handsome and literature made them tragic, they were monsters, feared, hunted, and buried with stakes through their hearts. The vampire myth is older than Dracula. It reaches deep into the shadows of ancient civilizations, born from our most primal fears. So, where did it all begin? Let's go back to the very first vampires. Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, gave rise to some of the oldest bloodthirsty entities in human myth. These ancient stories laid the foundation for vampire legends that would echo across the ages. One of the most terrifying? Lamashtu, a demoness feared for attacking mothers and newborns. With the head of a lion and the teeth of a donkey, she crept into homes at night, stole infants from their cradles, and drank their blood. Then there was Lily too, a seductive spirit of the night. She roamed the wilderness, luring men to their doom, draining their life force. Lily too would later evolve into Lilith. In Jewish myth, Adam's first wife turned demon. She too would prey on infants, haunt dreams, and become a prototype for the modern female vampire. But Mesopotamia's undead didn't stop there. The Ekemu, or Edemu, were spirits of the unburied dead. If someone died violently or without proper burial, their soul could rise again. These ghosts brought sickness, possession, and misfortune. Their presence was a warning. Disrespect the dead, and they will come for the living. All of these myths reveal one thing clearly. Even in the earliest civilizations, people believed the dead could rise and feed on the life of the living. Ancient Greece was filled with dark legends, myths of blood-drinking spirits that blurred the lines between life, death, and desire. The most infamous of them was Lamia. Once a queen of Libya, her life was shattered after an affair with Zeus. Hera, enraged, cursed Lamia, killing her children and driving her into madness. Transformed into a creature of the night, Lamia became a predator, stalking infants in their sleep, sucking their blood, devouring them in the dark. She was often imagined with serpentine features, a hybrid of woman and snake, symbolizing temptation and death. Her story was both a warning and a supernatural explanation for infant mortality. But Lamia wasn't alone. Empusa was a shape-shifting demon, servant of Hecate, goddess of witchcraft. She appeared as a beautiful woman, luring young men into isolation before draining their blood or life essence. Beneath her illusion, one leg of brass and one of a donkey. Grotesque, hidden by beauty. There were others, spectral beings like Mormo and Gello, spirits who haunted children and pregnant women. These female demons were feared and often the target of protective charms and spells. And then there were the Striges, owl-like creatures of the night that flew through the dark skies, shrieking, drinking blood, and preying on the living. The Strix also appeared in Roman mythology. But what sets them apart is that they're among the first vampire-like spirits ever recorded in written texts. Unlike purely oral myths, the Striges were mentioned by Roman authors like Ovid and Petronius, appearing in literature, spells, and magical practices of the time. They weren't just feared. They were fought. Romans used protective charms, incantations, and household wards etched in stone or metal to keep these spirits at bay. Their name eventually became a general term for witches and night spirits, and over centuries evolved linguistically into the strigoi of Romanian folklore, a direct ancestor of the modern vampire myth. In ancient Egypt, death wasn't the end. It was a journey, and to travel that journey in peace, the dead had to be honored, embalmed, and buried properly. If not, their spirits could turn malevolent, returning to torment the living. This fear shaped one of the most ritual-bound civilizations in history. Among Egypt's bloodiest deities was Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and vengeance. In one myth, when humanity offended the gods, Ra unleashed Sekhmet upon the world. She went on a rampage, slaughtering thousands and drinking their blood. Her thirst was so insatiable, the gods had to trick her. They poured red beer across the land, disguising it as blood. Sekhmet drank deeply, became intoxicated, and finally stopped the slaughter. One of the oldest tales of divine blood drinking, a god turned vampire in all but name. The Egyptians also believed in the Ka, a vital part of the soul that needed nourishment. Food and drink were placed in tombs to keep the Ka content. But if rituals were neglected, or the body was disturbed, the Ka could become hostile, returning to drain energy from the living. Then there was Amit, the devourer of the dead, a monstrous guardian of the afterlife. Amut consumed the hearts of the wicked, condemning their souls to eternal unrest. Not a vampire in the traditional sense, but a figure of spiritual death, the final horror for a soul denied peace. Egypt gave us no single vampire figure, but its gods, ghosts, and sacred fears helped shape the idea of the undead who feed on the living. In Hindu mythology, the Vatala is a malevolent spirit that inhabits corpses. It doesn't simply haunt the living. It wears their bodies, using them as vessels to walk among the world of the living. These spirits are drawn to cemeteries and are blamed for madness, illness, and even death. The most famous Vatala stories appear in the ancient text Vital Pachisi, where they are portrayed as clever, riddle-loving entities, always testing human wisdom. But beneath the riddles is danger. The Vatala blurs the line between ghost and vampire. It may not drink blood, but its relationship with the human body is deeply parasitic. It feeds on life indirectly, possessing the dead, stalking the night. In South Asian tradition, the undead were already feared as predators, not just of flesh, but of sanity and soul. The Vatala is proof that long before the vampire was given fangs, the idea of the undead feeding on the living was already deeply rooted. In Chinese folklore, the Jiangshi is a corpse that should have stayed dead, but didn't. It moves with unnatural stiffness, hopping through the night, searching for the life force, or qi, of the living. Unlike the seductive vampires of the West, the Jiangshi is grotesque. Pale greenish skin, long claw-like fingernails. Dressed in Qing dynasty robes, it is both regal and horrifying. These creatures can rise for many reasons: an improper burial, a violent death, or a spiritual imbalance left unresolved. In some tales, a Jiangshi forms when a person dies far from home, and the rituals to return their body go terribly wrong. Defenses against the Jiangshi are unique. Yellow talismans, written in red ink, were pressed onto its forehead to paralyze or destroy it. People also used mirrors, rooster crows, and even bags of sticky rice to repel it. Despite its ancient roots, the Jiangshi still haunts Chinese pop culture, appearing in horror films, stories, and even dark comedies. In West African mythology, the forests were home to more than just animals. They were the hunting grounds of monsters. Deep in the Ashanti forests lived the Asanbosam, a creature with iron teeth and hooked feet, perched high in the trees. It would drop down on unsuspecting travelers and feed on their blood. Similar beings were feared across the region, often linked to disease, punishment, or angry spirits. Then there was the Obaifo, a witch-like being from Ashanti and Dahomey lore. It drained the life force of children, spread sickness, and glowed faintly in the night like an eerie firefly. The Obaifo could leave its body, travel in spirit form, and was feared for its power to possess and consume. Among the Zulu, there was the Impundulu, the lightning bird. It served witches and was said to drink blood like a vampire, striking down victims with supernatural force. In Madagascar, the tale of the Ramanga was even more disturbing. Nobles were honored through a gruesome ritual. Loyal followers drank their blood and ate their nail clippings, a tradition of reverence, twisted by consumption. Across the continent, vampire-like beings took many forms: bird, spirit, monster, or human witch. But the theme remained. The living were vulnerable, and the forest always watched. In the Slavic world, especially in Serbia, Romania, and Poland, the line between the living and the dead was fragile and dangerous. Here, the word vampire was born. People believed that the recently dead could return, not as spirits, but as corpses that fed on the blood and energy of the living. Villages watched for signs: corpses that didn't rot, blood at the lips, or strange dreams and sudden deaths in the night. In some cases, a single unexplained illness could spark mass hysteria. Entire families were dug up, bodies were examined for signs of vampirism, and, if any were found, the corpse was staked, decapitated, burned to ash, or buried with garlic, iron, or bricks in its mouth to keep it from rising again. In Serbia, real names appear in vampire records, like Petar Blagojevich, whose case in 1725 led to one of the first vampire reports in Europe. In Poland, archaeologists have found skeletons with sickles across their throats and stones pressed against their jaws, intended to prevent resurrection. In Romania, vampire beliefs were deeply tied to family curses, shame, or the fear of someone dying unbaptized or unnatural. Before we enter the world of fiction, we must stop at the man many believe inspired it: Vlad the Impaler, a 15th century prince of Wallachia, in what is now Romania. To some, a tyrant; to others, a hero. Vlad III. Dracula ruled during a time of brutal warfare and political chaos. His preferred method of punishment? Impalement. He is said to have executed tens of thousands. Criminals, invaders, even rival nobles, all skewered on towering wooden stakes. His nickname, Dracula, came from his father, Vlad Dracul, a member of the Order of the Dragon, a Christian military order. Dracul meant dragon, but in Romanian, it also came to mean devil. So Vlad became Dracula, the son of the dragon, or son of the devil. By the early 1800s, vampires had escaped the village graveyard and entered the parlors of European high society, not through death, but through literature. These new vampires weren't just monsters. They were aristocrats, seducers, sometimes even tragic. In 1819, John Polidori's The Vampire introduced Lord Ruthven, cold, elegant, and predatory. He preyed upon the upper class and became the blueprint for the charming vampire noble. In 1872, Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla changed the game again. Carmilla was haunting, sensual, and targeted young women. The story dripped with forbidden sexuality and gothic dread, predating Dracula by 25 years. Then, in 1897, came Bram Stoker's Dracula, a novel soaked in Eastern European folklore, Christian symbolism, and Victorian anxieties about disease, immigration, and desire. Count Dracula was a predator, but also a relic, tragic, powerful, and unforgettable. These works transformed the vampire from a rural superstition into a literary icon, a mirror for society's deepest fears and darkest fantasies. And then, the vampire stepped onto the screen. Nosferatu, 1922. Silent, shadowy, and rat-like, captured old-world fear in pure horror. Dracula, 1931. Bela Lugosi's cape, accent, and hypnotic stare became the vampire's visual signature. The Hammer horror films of the 50s to 70s made vampires bloody, seductive, and intensely physical. In 1994, Interview with the Vampire reimagined them as tortured philosophers, emotional, sensual, and eternal. Then came the wave. Buffy, Blade, Twilight, comedy, horror, romance, action. The vampire could do it all. Whether feared, desired, or laughed at, the vampire was now everywhere, and it was never going to die. The vampire became a symbol of desire, power, guilt, and survival. Every culture shaped it. Every generation reimagined it. And it still walks among us, in stories and screens, and in the dark places we dare not look. This was the full history of vampires. And like the vampire itself, the story isn't over.